Good morning, everyone. Today I'll be sharing work related to my doctoral dissertation project. My project, Struggle for Justice, Black Feminist Cartographies of Race, Power, and Violence in the Jim Crow Era, asks the overarching question, how did Black women's clubs of the Jim Crow era develop a critical analysis of violence? The project shows Black club women as feminist cartographers who produce counter-cartographies through their network building, narratives, and physical maps which challenge their contemporary power relations and state technologies in order to make visible both lynching violence and the shifting geographies of violence during the era of Jim Crow. And so in proper geographic fashion, my project begins with a map. In 1922, Ida B. Wells, along with the Colored Women's Clubs of Michigan, created a Black political countermap. The Red Record of Lynching, 1889 to 1921, geographically distributed. Utilized for federal anti-lynching legislation advocacy, the map highlights the geographic distribution of lynching incidents and indicates the numbers of lynchings that occurred in each state from 1889 to 1921. The map in itself did not end the horrific practice of lynching. In fact, it is not until recently that the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act was passed in 2021. The Red Record of Lynching, however, does represent a powerful visualization and tool for understanding how Black club women of the 20th century were making sense of and producing a critical analysis of violence. Their analysis of violence from this map alone suggests a critical understanding of violence as multiscalar and political. So for my presentation today, I will first provide a brief review of geographies of violence and Black cartographies in order to ground the ways in which Black feminist thought and cartography might contribute to a critical analysis of violence. Two, share examples of mapping visualizations produced from the UW Design Challenge on Racial Violence this past spring. And three, reflect and discuss the implications for theorizing violence and visualizing this theory building cartographically. So theorizing violence and its entanglements with race and racialization has been a central theme for Black geographies. This includes, but is not limited to, engagements with space making and the Black geographic imagination, in addition to geographies of racial capitalism. Across these engagements with Black geographies, nuanced articulations of violence are produced, allowing for deeper insights for how we might theorize violence at multiple scales, across race and gender, through time, space, and place, or across a multiplicity of hierarchical power relations that are reproduced or produced anew through the process of racialization. Building on this geography of violence, I consider how a genealogy of Black feminist cartography does the work of untangling and articulating violence for a broader audience. Cultural and historical geographers in particular have worked to shed some light on the ways that African Americans have produced their own critical cartographies of the African American freedom struggle, ranging from the work of Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, SNCC power mapping, and most recent, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, which memorializes victims of white mob violence. Missing, however, is an analysis for how their work contributes to theories of violence and the ways that this particular use of data and data visualization offers for present efforts in challenging power and advocating for justice. More recently, feminist cartographer Megan Kelly has argued for a deeper engagement with the ways intersectionality and Black feminist thought invite cartographic thinking. While a majority of the remainder of this talk will further attest to her claims, my ultimate goal is to bring attention to a deeper genealogy and praxis of Black feminist cartography that requires our attention and engagement with as critical geographers and cartographers with an eye towards justice and abolition. So to explore these questions around theorizing and visualizing violence, I was part of co-organizing a day-long mapping workshop with the Cartography Lab at UW-Madison. The Cart Lab Design Challenge is an annual event organized by the UW-Madison Cartography Lab and the Department of Geography. The Design Challenge is a one-day mapping workshop that challenges students, cartographers, and geographers to create a map or a series of maps during an 8-hour stretch. Teams of students work with community partners, topic experts, and data experts on real-world issues. This year, the challenge theme was to decipher and historicize the term race riot through cartographic visualization. We asked participants to collaboratively create an atlas that explored U.S. race riot incidents between 1889 and 1945 to explore the dimensions of human experience and the retelling of racial violence, its processes, and the sites of its reckoning. Design Challenge participants were encouraged to draw on historical materials and a collection of archived newspaper articles of the time period to explore the challenges and opportunities brought with visualizing violence. So one unique aspect of this project was the integration of archival methods and cartography. The data used for the Design Challenge was aggregated from an online database of over 270 U.S. African American newspapers between 1827 and 1998. Newspapers were sourced based on the search terms race riot and Negro and bombing and Negro. Cumulatively, we collected 765 results, which served as the main data set for the Design Challenge, in addition to some historical New York Times headlines and anecdotal data from Ida B. Wells's historiography and narratives on these topics. These data sets were intentionally sourced in order to prioritize and highlight how this information was being shared across African American communities and networks. So at 9 a.m. on a frigid Wisconsin Saturday in February, 25 of us gathered for the day-long challenge. After brief introductions, we divided up into small groups between 1 to 3 people to create maps on this theme of racial violence. While I didn't personally really make my own map, I had the opportunity to check in with every group and offer critical feedback and visualizing this topic, which included brainstorming how to avoid visualizations that sensationalized and spectacularized racial violence and instead highlighted the structural nature of violence in this form. Halfway through our time together, each group shared a draft of their project, and we collaboratively worked to group the maps into themes that would become chapters of the atlas. This process was surprisingly fast, and as a result, we produced the following themes and chapters. Chapter 1 was headlining violence, Chapter 2, systems in place, and Chapter 3, narratives. As a collective, we produced 12 maps, and today I'd like to highlight 2 creative mapping visualizations which speak to the range of thoughtful approaches on this theme and the power of this medium for articulating and visualizing structural violence. Okay, so this first map was produced by Yanbing Chang and Bryn Petrello, who are master's students at UW-Madison in cartography and here at the conference today, in addition to Design Challenge participants. Using newspaper headlines, they sought to highlight the horror of this everyday violence that continues to occur to this day. This map, through its irony, seeks to solicit a concern and awareness for the continued normalization of violence of this nature. The creativity and levity of the map's design and presentation reframes what would otherwise be a series of racist headlines and spectacles. Instead, we're invited to engage with the map under the guise of a bright sunny day and then forced to contend with the violence and injustice of the past and present. So the second map I'd like to share is titled The Making of Southern Horrors and was produced by Vignesh Ramachandran, a PhD student in the geography department at UW-Madison. This map draws direct connections from the early life of Ida B. Wells, in which 3 young men she was close with, who ran a local People's grocery store, were lynched in March of 1892 in Memphis, Tennessee. These moments, Ramachandran highlights, had a great impact on Wells's commitment to abolition and justice. The map highlights Wells' own narration at the forefront with a map of Memphis in the foreground with plots in red and yellow to indicate locations of white mob violence. I share this map to highlight the value of incorporating narration and narrative in relation to how violence is perpetrated and experienced from the perspective of the victims and their communities. Wall's narrative enhances the significance of the sites of violence, producing a map that engages with a deeper story of struggle and justice. As individuals, we are shaped by our histories and experiences. Ramachandran's map, therefore, encourages us to consider not only Wells's contributions to anti-lynching organizing, but Well's efforts as a product of her larger community of Black women organizers and her experiences of grief, terror, and horror. So in addition to these examples, feedback from Design Challenge participants further illuminated the ways that the collaborative mapping and atlas creation process provided a critical site for theorizing violence. For example, one participant shared, quote, "The Design Challenge helped me better understand the persistence of racial violence as well as the struggle against it in a wider historical and geographic context," end quote. Through this experience, we found that cartographic visualization can be an extremely valuable tool for producing critical thought. Most meaningful from this experience was the impact that the collaborative process had on educating individuals on the topic of racial violence, but also for developing a critical theorization of violence via the collaborative process of thinking through effective ways for visualizing violence over time. So finally, I'd like to return to the map I began this presentation with. This map was also produced via a collaborative mapping process, including the likes of Congress, I.W. Wells, and the Black Women's Club of Michigan. It was a map that was created with the intention of offering a narrative around scales of violence and power, and created with the intention of transforming geographic imaginations. I'd like to suggest then that much of the data we collected from the Design Challenge or the impact of the Design Challenge as an experience is not anything new or novel. In fact, I think it is something that instead can be traced through a genealogy of Black feminist cartography. It is this history that I'm interested in revealing and exposing, offering us new opportunities to consider a deeply historical intersection of Black geographies and feminist cartography. For me, this Design Challenge was a recovery of a historical and critical practice of Black feminist cartography and theory making that I think is worth our re-engagement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kela. We have time for a couple questions.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful talk. I had a question about maybe the practicality of the Design Challenge itself. So I thought it was a novel idea to sort of leverage like the UW Cart Lab, but then have like an expert yourself sort of ensuring that, you know, the maps weren't sensationalized or that everything remained on track. So for folks that maybe want to recreate that experience, what were some like key takeaways that you think are important to sort of maybe using this model to produce equally like important and poignant work?
Great question. I think a lot of the participants came in with a critical sense of this topic and sensitivity. And I think a concern for how to visualize this. Something I've been working with, my advisor is really thinking about this idea of visualizing violence and the impact it can have, but also thinking about concerns. I think just having open conversations with people, asking questions if kind of something they suggest is maybe feels a little uncomfortable, and just kind of prompting folks to kind of come to a different type of visualization on their own.
Cool. Any other questions? No? Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.